Okay.
Okay, everyone. Thanks for coming. Today we have Eleanor Winters, and she's going to be doing Write Together with us, a demo and a Write Together on Rotunda, the script. So take it away, Eleanor.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. I know it's early in the morning for some of you and late at night for others. So we have to deal with these time zones. And what I want to say first is that I know it's going to be recorded. I have a cough and I'm coughing intermittently. So I'm going to apologize once. I can't help it. And so be it. So, it's very hard to try not to cough. I've been saying I will not cough, but it's been going on for a little while and I'm trying to get rid of it. So meanwhile, I'm here to show you some things, to talk about some things, to do a little demonstration for an alphabet that is really quite remarkable. And it is one that is in a way um, I wouldn't say it's the only alphabet that does what it does, but it's one of the few where some of the basic rules that we as calligraphers are brought up with, that we grow up with, we break. And my education in calligraphy was always very traditional, and one of the building blocks of broad edge pen calligraphy has always been the fixed pen angle. Now, let me say one thing here. I'm not sure if everybody who's watching this live or recording, those of you who are watching a recording of this, is a calligrapher. So I'm going to give you just a little, sort of a little apology, because this is definitely a calligrapher's alphabet. It's not something where I could say to a group of interested artists, hey, let's all do this because we're going to have fun. So I'm going to say to you calligraphers, we're going to have fun. And to the rest of you, I hope you enjoy watching, because it's tricky, it's esoteric, it's very beautiful. And it's also, I would say, it's neglected. It's one of the Gothic alphabets that isn't taught very much, as far as I can tell, looking at what's going on around the world in calligraphic education. It Not that it isn't as good. Of course it's as good. It's wonderful and very beautiful. But maybe it's harder, maybe it's more complex, maybe it has rules that are so different from other alphabets. So recently, as part of a program that I'm in called Historical Scripts, where I'm teaching introductory kind of taster classes in a number of different hands, I did a couple of days of Rotunda. And having done that, it kind of forced me to go back and read about it and study it and practice it, because it certainly needs practice. And having not done it much in recent, I'm going to say years, I won't even say months, I put in a lot of time practicing, and I thought, wow, this is so beautiful. Why don't we do more Rotunda? So when the opportunity arose to do a sharing session with you all out there, I thought, well, I just taught this, 2 or 3 weeks ago. So let me give you what I called, as a joke. I was saying to my mentoring group, I called it Speed Rotunda, because Rotunda cannot be taught in an hour. I mean, calligraphy can't be taught in an hour, but I think you could, even as a neophyte, you could hold a pen and make some letters and trace and copy and learn some italic or foundational, or certainly textura, which has very repeated simple strokes. But Rotunda needs weeks, months, years. So therefore, instead of doing it very, very fast, which is an option that I have rejected, I'm going to give you a taste of it. And a taste is going to be some pictures to look at, a little bit of history, and then I'm going to demonstrate some of the letters for you, and you'll see how they're structured, because they have as I said, they have their own rules. So I'm going to switch. I have here my documents camera, and it's going to show you what is on my my desk here. And here we go. So, oops, I just have to, let me move it and focus. Okay, so this first page is my handout from various workshops that I've taught in Rotunda. And just to give you a little bit of historical background, this was actually as early as the 13th century. I wrote here 14th to 16th, but it spanned several decades. It was mostly Southern European, as opposed to the a very narrow Gothic scripts of Germany, France, even Britain in in the Middle Ages, which are generally described as textura. I mean, they fall under the umbrella of textura, and textura is a vertical, narrow, somewhat difficult to read script. Rotunda, on the other hand, consists of a combination of vertical strokes and very rounded letters. The word rotunda, it means round. So this is considered, or it's sometimes referred to as a round Gothic, which is almost a contradiction in terms, because what we think of as a Gothic script is a very narrow and compressed alphabet. In fact, the word black letter, which describes the whole family of Gothic scripts, is a descriptive term that refers to the look of a page of writing in Gothic where the letters are close together and the lines are close together, and the overall impression of the page is black. Rotunda is a black letter script in a kind of in a broad definition of the term, but in fact, it's often, now I'm going to show you here, I'm going to show you a couple of examples here. It's often, here's a nice one, very open. Look at all that white space for you calligraphers who have learned or are learning about negative space. The negative space in this word, or here, this is a D-O-I-N. You can read this, especially if you can read Latin, it helps a little bit. You can identify the individual letters, and there's a lot of space between the letters. There's space. I'm going to go really close. Let's look at that. There's space inside the letters and after the letters. And as most of you know, I'm sure, in a more, let's say, a more traditional textura script, there's very little space either inside or outside the letters. So I'll demonstrate a little of that later. So what else do we see here? We see this. Now, these are musical notes. Textura, not textura, a rotunda is the alphabet of choice for music manuscripts. Now, when we say music manuscript, so here's another one. These are notes that are different from our current musical notation system. I think there are paleographers who perhaps could follow this, the music here. It's on a 4-bar staff as opposed to 5, and they don't have, the little lines going off them. But I'm sure there are people out there who can recognize these, which does not include me. I do not know 16th century, 15th century musical notation, but these pages were in fact very large, and these were big sheets of vellum. Here's another one that were used in church during services for the choir. And what did they do? They would stand these up. Let me see if I have a dimension on this. I don't have the measurement, sorry. They would stand these up on a lectern, and the whole choir could see it. And they could see the words, and they could see the music. And extant today, in especially here in the Siena Cathedral Library, where I got this book, There are many of these pages that have been preserved. They were done on vellum, which lasts, hundreds and hundreds of years. And this is interesting because this book is about the miniatures, meaning the paintings, but in and among the illustrations is the calligraphy. And so you can see where they were mostly interested in this. The author of this book wrote about these tiny, tiny paintings inside well, not even that tiny. I mean, these were big sheets of vellum. And this is a collection. Here's a nice big blow up. CELORUM, right? You can read it. We can read it. So what we're going to do, you and I, either watching or even if you like working along with me, if you have, one of the things that we haven't done, I apologize for not suggesting this. I didn't send out a list of materials and say, well, if you want to do this as a write along, please have this pen or this ink or this paper. So instead, what I'll do is I'll explain everything I'm using, and you can watch it again on the video and try it at that point. So maybe watching instead of, scrambling to draw lines might be a more effective use of this 1 hour that we have. So we have examples, and this is basically how I learned this alphabet. I studied bits of these choir pages, and I also studied some historical manuscripts reproduced in books. So, for example, this marvelous book. Let me just find the example. There's a wonderful calligraphy historian named Stan Knight, who wrote a book called Historical Scripts, which is a compendium of individual pages, each of which is devoted to one alphabet. The book is still available. Historical Scripts. Stan is his first name, Stan, Stan Knight, and he found a beautiful example of every script that he was writing about, and he reproduced a page and then blew it up so you could see the details of the writing, and also included, this is reproduced same size. This is the size of the writing in the actual manuscript. So for each page in his book, he shows you a full page, a blow up, a full page, and the actual size of the writing. And one thing I'd like you to notice, and this is kind of jumping ahead of myself, but you'll notice that these letters are quite dense. Look at this is a U, UID. Look at the space inside the U, after the U, before the I, after the I, before the D. Even the width of the D, which is quite round, but has quite a narrow lemon-shaped counter. And when we look again, let's look back at our music manuscripts from Italy. And I just want you to see this is MIS. That's the long S. Look at all the space inside here. So in both cases, you had a master scribe who took the space inside the M and repeated it before the I, so that the balance between what we call the counter, the inside of the letter, and the space after the letter were visually equal. And the same thing happened here, but so much closer. So my point is, a couple of points, is that we as students of an alphabet, and indeed I would call myself a student of Rotunda, we have to look at various examples and see what we like. We can choose. We can decide to try to reproduce a wide and kind of tall rotunda like this one, or a narrow and dense rotunda. And I also have here, see that you can see the overall page is very elegant, but also very, very much toward the black letter look. When I say the black letter look, I mean, look how narrow and heavy strokes and narrow white spaces. And yet the page has this interplay of white. Look at the P, the D. This is DC or DE. That's an E. Okay, here's another characteristic. I'm going to do that. That's an E. Another characteristic of Rotunda, which I read about in one of the sources, is that they did it with a very sharp quill. So wherever you have a thin line, which there are not many, there's the E, right? This is an E too. It looks like a C because the thin line it almost disappears. And this might be considered a little bit of a disadvantage of studying the script. You can barely see it there. There's just about the shadow, the ghost of there it is. Now you see it's Homine, not NC. So even without knowing much Latin, and I know very little Latin, I knew that had to be an E. Okay, so this is the Stan Knight page. This is one from France. So this is, or the south of France. Okay, it's from Avignon, 14th century. Also a little more open, a little more white space on this page. And yet again, it has a little bit of that almost textura look, that black letter look. So were you in my quickie 2-session class, we would have analyzed these a little bit more. But what we're going to do now is look at some of the letter forms. And then if there's a little time at the end, I'm going to talk about this. Now I'm going to blow this a little bit and I'll tell you what I'm talking about. One of the very wonderful characteristics of Rotunda is what are called conjoined letters. This P and E become one letter because the right side of the P and the left side of the E occupy a single space. And that was done frequently. Here's DE. Here's VE. So what are we seeing here? We are seeing letters that have a curve on the right, followed by a letter that has a curve on the left. And they were combined to make a single form. It's not a new letter. It's P and E, but it creates a ligature. And indeed, you have ligatures elsewhere. You have letters that touch the letter that follows, which if there's time, I could also talk about that. But what that did, and here's my best guess, it helped condense the page a little bit, make it a little bit less wide, so that A, they could fit a little bit more onto the line, and B, it helped with what they called the justified right margin. See, if you have a DO here, it's still going out of the margin a bit. If the O was separated, it would have come over to here. So they did these conjoined letters, and what they do for me, looking at it, I mean, I don't really mind whether the right margin is straight or not. That's not my priority. But what I like is this bouncing look of lines and letters and forms and white spaces and curves that create a movement on the page and make it a very beautiful alphabet. So that's my sales talk, why we should all study Rotunda. And what I would like to do is talk to you. Oops, I just took my exemplar away. I want to talk to you about how the letters are actually made. Oh, here it is. Here's my exemplar. And first of all, from my own exemplar, my own ductus that I used in my class. And again, let me say that when you're studying a historical script, it's very helpful to have a full alphabet with basic strokes that your teacher gives you, or you got from another teacher or from a student or whatever. But don't forget to look at the historical manuscripts, because not only will that give you examples of the alphabet when it was used, which means that the scribes who made those music manuscripts or the missals or they're almost always books for the church. They were doing this every day, and this was their alphabet. So when you look at what I do, not to say that I don't think it's nicely done. It is indeed. This was created to teach. This was not created so that I could, go to Siena and move in and make music manuscripts, much as it sounds like a wonderful idea. So use this or something like this to study the strokes, see how the strokes are applied to the letter forms, and then go back and look at the various historical models that you can find. And they are reproduced in a lot of books. They're reproduced in calligraphy history books. They're reproduced in beautiful, reproduction illuminated manuscript books. Because as you could see from these were postcards that I bought in Siena. They have all this wonderful paintings. So it's very popular for books of illuminated manuscripts to include pages like this without all that much information about the letters, but the historians are so interested in these amazing paintings. Now we could see it a little bit better. Okay, so what do we see here? Why is Rotunda so special? And the reason, in addition to Rotunda having this play between verticals and rounded forms, excuse me, is this. There are a number of different pen angles within the very letter forms. And basically, you have three main pen angles. Now, the main pen angles, now here's just for those of you who are not daily calligraphers or aren't doing much with broad edge pen. So a 0-degree pen angle is, you know what? Hang on, I'm getting a colored pen. Don't go away. Okay, I'm back. I realized that pencil on pencil does not show all that well. So this is considered a 0-degree pen angle. Now, what does that mean? This is 0 degrees. It means that your pen is held parallel to the writing line. This is not a common pen angle. For those of you who have a little bit of a broader base historical background, I refer you, or even if you don't, I refer you to the Book of Kells, which is an extraordinary manuscript. It's the 4 gospel books that were produced in 800 AD on the island of Kells. And I mention this because the alphabet in the Book of Kells, which is not Rotunda, it's called half uncial, and that alphabet is written at 0 degrees, which is very, very unusual. I would say it's about the hardest alphabet you can learn. I mean, that depends. You might find Roman capitals harder, but half uncial, it involves a certain position of your pen, which takes a lot of practice. So we use that 0-degree pen angle. And if you look at basic stroke number 1 over here, here it is. Here's your pen position. Oops, I'll put a pen here.
7:30? Maybe, I don't know.
Oops. So don't forget to mute yourself. Okay, so that's a 0-degree pen angle, not very neatly written. There are also letters and strokes that have a 30-degree pen angle. So what is 30 degree? Well, you know what? Let's skip 30 for a moment and go to the one that most of you have done for your italic, and that is 45 degrees. And I will say that the 45-degree pen angle only comes up a couple of times in Rotunda, but we need to be aware of it. And then, not quite halfway between, we have this, and this is 30 degrees. I'm doing this without the benefit of a protractor, but it's what we call a flatter pen angle. It's flatter than 45 and steeper than 0. Now, here's what makes this so interesting. Not only do we use 3 pen angles, but in some of the elements that create these letters, we start with one pen angle and end with another. And this is something that is interesting. There are some I've seen some very free form calligraphy where the pen swivels, from letter to letter. This is not quite like that. This is very structured. So we have here a downstroke that starts at 0 degrees and ends at 30. How do we do that? I'm going to show you. We have another one here that starts at 30 and ends at 0. So these two strokes, which are in some of the letters, involve manipulating your pen as you move it. This is an easy one. This is 30-30, beginning to end. So you're going to be very happy doing that one. You don't have to do any pen turning. And let me skip that for a moment. The strokes that comprise the O are also 30 degrees. So those also don't involve manipulation. These two, the 0 to 30, 30 to 0, those are the tricky ones. And those are the ones that we kind of can't avoid because we have letters here. You can see, let me come put it. You can see the R here. Let me find you an M. You can see it on the historical models as well as my own. Here's an M. Bottom of the M, flat, top of the M, 30. So I have actually tried just leaving that out and doing everything at 30. And it makes a nice alphabet, but it's not really rotunda. So to get what we call the flat feet, so here, 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 here. It's quite a few letters. The F, we sometimes need to do some manipulation. Okay, so let's talk about materials. And then what I'm going to do is show you these basic strokes. I'm looking at the clock. We have half an hour more. So I'll be able to show you how some of the letters are constructed as well. And what I'm going to recommend something that I never recommend in any calligraphy class until I did this Rotunda class a couple of weeks ago, and that's this. This is a parallel pen. And actually one of my students who's here now, Tox, I know he's here, kind of, tempted me to try the parallel pen. It always seemed a little bit like a cheat to me because it's a fountain pen. And I like the idea of dipping my pen into ink and regulating the flow and having or a quill, and having a very precise line. The advantage of this, and here it is, it's a broad edge fountain pen, is that it moves on the page. You can slide it on the page in a way that is a little smoother and has less resistance than a dip pen. So I decided to do some practice work with this one. This is a 3.8 millimeter nib. And what I did was I compared it with the 4.0 Browse nib. And Browse, as you can see by the condition of my pen holder, is usually my nib of choice. So this is a 4.0 and this one is a 3.8. They're almost identical. It's within, 2 millimeters. So working fairly large, it doesn't make a big difference. So for comfort's sake, if you want to try this, a fountain pen with a broad edge slides a little more easily, and that will only affect these two strokes and a little bit this one that I'm going to get to in a moment. For the 30-degree pen angle, for the flat pen angle, you can work with a Browse, you can work with a Mitchell. I also pulled out, just if we have a moment, I'm going to show you a 5 millimeter Zig marker, because markers, these are not, the first-class calligraphy tools, but they're great for pen manipulation. So I'm going to show you how that works as well. So to do a little demonstration for you, I'm going to use my parallel pen, and I will show you, let me show you this. This is 4 pen widths, which is my chosen X height. When I say my chosen X height, when I look at some of those historical models, there are definitely some that are taller than 4 pen widths. And I think if we look at that very heavy one from this example, I think this might even be a little shorter than 4 pen widths. So we as students can say, this is the weight I want. So that, for example, if you have a letter at 4 pen widths, I'm just going to make a downstroke here at 45 degrees. And you have the same downstroke at 5 pen widths, it's going to change the character of the piece. So I'm choosing, and I'm using a 30-degree pen angle. I'm choosing a 4 pen width, X height, and it's marked here at the bottom, 1.5 pen width ascender and descender. And in most of the examples that I have seen of Rotunda, the ascender and descender are relatively short compared to the X height. So most of the character of the letter is between waistline and baseline. Okay, so as such, I have also chosen this paper, which is just a practice paper. It's, in fact, here in France, this is a paper that they sell, in the, stationery stores. It's like a student paper, not calligraphy. It's just for homework. And it has these boxes, these little squares that are 5 millimeters by 5 millimeters, and 3 of them, which is 15 millimeters high, works out to be my 4 pen width X height. If I multiply 3.8 by 4, it's going to be a little shorter. But what happens typically is that the ink bleeds a tiny, tiny bit on the paper. So I don't really need to cut it off here and make it just that little bit shorter. I can use my full space. So I'm using this practice paper. I will recommend, for when you're practicing this on your own, that you can draw your lines. These are drawn 15 millimeters high if you're using either a 4 millimeter nib or this 3.8 millimeter parallel pen. These vertical lines are extremely helpful because we're doing some movement that it's a little difficult to make a straight line. I'm going to do it right, and I'm going to do it wrong for you. So I'm going to jump right in and do a 0-degree stroke. Now here is my ascender line. Here is my waistline. Here's my baseline. Okay, so I'm going to go from the ascender to the baseline. And what am I doing? I'm moving my paper to the right, and I'm slanting it so that my hand isn't too stressed. If my paper was here, my hand would be turned. You can't really see this, but I'll tell you, it's very uncomfortable. So I keep it to the right. I can see it well, too. My head is here. My hand is to the right. I can put my pen here at the line, and here's a line. Now, what did I do here? I did something a little special that may not have been immediately noticeable. When I got to the baseline, I pushed a little bit on the right corner of the nib. I'm going to exaggerate that a little bit. Now watch what I'm doing. I'm pushing like that. And whoops, so that I get a square edge at the bottom. Otherwise, sometimes that vertical stroke comes out. I'm going to do this wrong. Comes out a little bit like that, a little bit uphill. And what we want to create these forms, this rotunda experience, is what we call this flat-footed Gothic. It should have an ending. And one of the things that I read actually in the description in the Stan Knight book was that he postulates that they finished the bottom of the stroke with the corner of the nib. So what he's saying is that they do this and then turn the pen on the corner and draw it in like that. And that takes a little extra movement, but it comes out very clean. And what I'm suggesting is that you try to stay at 0 and push a little bit at the bottom. So that's tricky, takes practice. All of this takes practice. And if I didn't have these vertical lines, let me go back to my suggestion about using a graph pad or something like that. Sometimes this is what happens. It pulls. You see my letter is pulling to the left. And so I'm going to say no, and that was because I wasn't paying attention. Sometimes if I put my nib right next to a vertical line and then only look at the vertical line as I move down toward the baseline, I can keep it straighter. And this is not a big issue with, with italic or copperplate or but with Rotunda we want to get a really strong vertical stroke. So now what else can we do? We can look at these for a couple of letters, for a few forms. We're going to start flat and turn the pen, and I'm going to show you what seems to be the best way to do this. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start like this and just get my pen started. And then this is a very small movement, but I'm separating it and coming back. And then I lift my pen and come back at a little bit of an angle like that, which overlaps this. So I have this little beginning, and then I'm going to put my pen like that and continue moving down. And as I get to the bottom, I'm going to swivel it a little bit more and finish a little steeper. So I'm going to finish at 30. So I'm going from 0 to maybe, let's say 20 or something, a little less than 0, and then swiveling a little bit when I get to the bend. So let me do that now. Now here, I'm swiveling a little bit. I'm going to separate it like that so I can finish at 30. You see, I'm at 30 here. I'm slightly less than 30. So it's a movement that is a little bit like that. And again, with this fountain pen, it moves easily on this relatively smooth paper. If I did that, let me just pull this up and show you. Here's a 5mm marker. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.5. So here's my vertical stroke. So easy with a marker. Going straight. Whoops, I wobbled a little bit, but it is easy. And I could do the same thing I did here, and that swivel is very fluid. Let me clean that up a bit. So with a marker, it's pretty easy. I'm going to do that a little better just to give you a better model. There we go. So here's a nicer model. But I'm not recommending substituting a marker for either a parallel pen or a dip pen. But it's kind of nice, if you're not really getting it, it's nice to switch off. It's very relaxing. You don't have to press very hard, and it works very easily. Okay, so we have this second stroke where I'm starting at 30 and 0, and I'm ending at 30. And that stroke, you'll be happy to know, we don't use very often. So where are we using it? We're using it in the B, and we're not only using it in the L, but it is the L. And other letters that have that bend are at 30 degrees the whole way. So It's really just a couple of strokes. You'll see here and here, we stay at the 30-degree position. So I'm 30. Now, let me tell you something about what we call the bend. I call this a bend. And here too, it's a bend. And this differentiates Rotunda from textura. So with textura, we have this and that. We have a sharp corner. With Rotunda, we swivel the pen and continue in a curvilinear form, and it is what I call a bend. If you get a chance to study Gothicized italic at some point, something similar happens where the strokes have a bend here and here. That has a relationship to the Rotunda. Okay, so just let me back up a little bit and tell you about, I'm going to skip this let me tell you about these two strokes. Your basic 30-degree stroke stays at 30, a bend, a vertical, and a bend, and a stop. No thin line. In some cases, and this is a very beautiful part of Rotunda, something interesting happens here, where that stroke is doing almost the same as this, 30, 30, and then under the line, 30. In some of the letters, it breaks the line. And however, something kind of amazing happens here, which is just about here, as you're making your bend, you're going to turn your pen a little steeper. You're going to swivel your hand a little bit, like that, and finish with an upstroke. And look at this. This is 45 degrees. And this 45-degree ending is part of the M and the N, and sometimes the I. I didn't do it on the I on this exemplar, but it's often used on the I as well. So that's another unusual quality of this alphabet. There's sometimes a change. Now we have 30 here, and we come down, and then we swivel it a little bit and make it steeper at the end. So I'm noticing we don't have a lot of time left. So let's look at the other unusual stroke where we go from 30 to 0. And in this case, we're going to start just like these at 30. And we're going to come over a little bit. And as we turn, as we make our bend, we're going to flatten the pen a little bit. So we have here 30 and a little bit flatter. And as we get to the line, we're going to try to do this. We're trying to push it into the line. Let's look at that. I'm swiveling a little bit and pushing to give it a flat ending. Okay, and I just touched it again to make sure I got it right. So I think this is actually one of the more difficult strokes. We start at 30, we start to bend. As we bend, we flatten it a little bit. We stay almost flat, and then we push into the line at the bottom. And that is going to give us a stroke that appears on the M and the N. And I think basically those two. Right. Okay. So the strokes that comprise the O are 30 degrees all the way. Oh, so let me just indicate this. This is 0, 30. That's easy to fix. 30 and 0. And then our two big curved strokes, which begin below the line and curving over. And then we put our pen just at the line and make the opposite curve and stop. So what happens is the combination of these two strokes, 1 and 2, create our O form, with a slightly flattened edge here and here. So what we're not doing is this. We're not pulling it up like that and overlapping like that, which is the O you have in Anshul and Rotunda, foundational, which is very similar. The difference happens right here, where the edge is a bit angular. So let me do that again. See, I'm stopping, and you can see I'm kind of emphasizing this. It's this and this, as opposed to that. You see? And here I'm stopping. I'm putting my pen just at the thin point, and I'm stopping. So that's actually a little bit better. This bled a little bit. Okay, so that form is the basis of so many letters in this alphabet. I'm going to do a few letters for you because I realize there is not all that much time left, and I'd love to do the whole alphabet. But let me just say that based on the O, we have the C, the E, the D. And notice I'm pulling the stroke a little bit and stopping with that same kind of flat edge. Okay, so it doesn't, it's rounded, but it's not as soft as foundational. Let me do a foundational C. You see, this has a softer look. So that's not what we're doing. The E is the same. So you pull it and stop. You come down and then slide in. And there's your hairline. The D I love. The D has a little something extra. Now, this is based on an uncial form with the flat top. Again, I'm stopping a little bit angular. Now, what does the D have? This part of the D has a little stroke like that, has a little point. And to do that, we just go up and down in a very small movement. So the movement is that. And that, what that does is it gives the top of the D that little pat kind of. And I'm going to do that again because I overlapped it a little bit. Like that. There we go. That's a nice clean one. And that's one of those little nuances of this alphabet that is very charming, very easy, but you need to make an extra stroke to do that. Okay, so these are all 30 degrees. We're doing the easy stuff. Using our 30-degree pen angle, we can make a U, all 30 degrees. And then, now here on the U, we generally do this for the second stroke. It has a little pull below the line. And notice I swiveled a little bit. You can see the 45 degrees and an upstroke. So some of the letters are actually quite easy. You can make a W. And in this one, I extend the base a little bit as I did on the U. And then the right side of the W is a narrow curve like that. And as I make stroke 2 and stroke 3, where am I looking? I'm looking at the inside of the letter. Okay, so there are a number of letters that you can do without changing your pen angle. You can do the I just like that. No upstroke. The dot on the I is very interesting. I'm going to do it very big. You come up, you come down, and you go back. So it's a very, very narrow triangle, but it's within a tiny space. Like that. So the top part is just a little wider and the bottom is narrower. I'll do that again. I'll do it a little bit bigger, up, over, back, or up, over, back. Okay, even smaller than that. Okay, and I generally like the eye that swings below the line. But you have choices. You can do either one. You can do the same thing with the J, and here we're going to come down into the descender space and pull a little bit left, just giving it a little tail. And I steepen the pen a little bit at the bottom, so the end of the letter is a bit more like 45 degrees. Okay, let me do one or two of the pen change letters, but because I'm afraid Dorothy is going to say enough, goodbye. So we have our L. We're going to turn the L into a B by using the second stroke of the O. Again, I'm starting at the ascender line and I'm turning it a little bit. Okay, again, you see it's flat over here. I put my pen right touching the downstroke and I draw the second stroke of the O. Like that. And there's our B. So this has one stroke that starts at 0 and ends at 30, and another stroke that's entirely at 30. So there's a little bit of math involved in understanding this alphabet. If we want to make an M or an N, we're going to use the other stroke. We're going to use 30, swivel, and little push on the baseline. I'll do an N because the N has as its second stroke the one that turns at the bottom. It's a very interesting letter. One of the things I do sometimes, just to make this a bit more complicated, I do the second stroke starting at 30, and then I go a little flatter and then turn it back. So there's a little more manipulation right here in the middle. And the purpose is to keep the right side from being significantly thinner than the left side. But that's a little bit of extra practice to get that. So let's look at the S, and I'll give you a trick for the S. The S is done in 4 strokes, and what we need to do is pay attention to the midpoint of our X space. And we start with a curve, and the top of the ending of the curve touches the middle, and the bottom of the beginning of the opposite curve touches the middle. So I'll do that without the dot. I'm stopping right in the middle. And then we imagine, I'll do this with a pencil. We imagine there's a line going through here, and I start my pen at the line and stop here. And I start my pen at the thin point of the first stroke and I stop here so that you can actually connect all 4 strokes. This is a great letter. It takes a lot of practice. I would actually make it maybe a tiny bit rounder. I feel like I compressed it a bit. And what I'm going to do is just show you how those overlapping letters work, and then I'm going to have to say goodbye because we're out of time. So if you have any letter with a curve on the right, so obviously we start with the O, and followed by any letter with a curve on the left, when I make my second letter, I'm aiming for a complete overlap of the 2 strokes. I don't want any part of the second letter extending to the right. So it's a question of aiming. Like that. Here's O, E, like that. And what I'm doing, just to give you a little hint, as I make the first stroke of the E, I am looking at the inner edge of the O. That's where my focus is, so that I touch that edge. The two strokes touch the same spot. And this can be done, as you might be aware, this can be done with all of these letters. You can do D-O, O-Q, B-O, B-E, B-C, anything with a curve. And you can probably create 20 new letters by doing this. So I would suggest, since we are definitely out of time, that you take a look at this. And I don't think there's anything that's a mystery on here, because I've shown you, except for that, the top of the P, that is a mystery, because that serif, I'll do that, that serif starts at 45 and goes above the line, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to my hand. So what I do is I start coming down, I leave that, goes above the line, and then I put my pen back flat and come down to my descender line here, and then I come back and I come in like that, and that creates that built-up serif. That's the one letter that I really had to try lots of different options to make that work. It kept overlapping and being too big and too heavy. So that took some practice. The rest of the alphabet, I think you can practice these strokes and apply them. And you'll find here, this one is like the top of the M and the N, but wider. That's your Q. Letters that drift down into a thin line, like the X. This is also an overlap. The letter itself has two strokes overlapping. And the H, they both have that overlap. And most of the others are 30 degrees, 30 degrees. This is 0 for your first stroke and 30 for your second. So I know that, I could go on way beyond our limit. So what I'm going to do is just say thank you for tolerating this, very speedy approach to a very complex alphabet. And I'm very happy to see any practice work. I always offer this to my students. If you want to teach yourself Rotunda and send me a page of practice, I would be very happy to comment for you. And otherwise, Dorothy, is there time for questions?
Yeah, there is a question. Sabina wants to know, can you demonstrate the curve in the back of the letter G?
Yeah. Okay. Back to the, yes. Back to the other camera. The right one? I guess that's what she means. Okay, this is actually, you could almost, Sabina, you could almost trace it, and you'll see that we're starting with our O, we're going across, and this is what we call a modified S curve. So let me show you that. I'm making sure this is wide enough so that the big curve touches it, although sometimes it misses by a little bit. This one touched. Then just staying at 30, this is all 30 degrees across. It's going to look like a very odd shape of the C. And then I'm going to slide down from that edge. I'll do it over here. I'm going to slide down and go into a curve. When I say a modified S curve, it's about the same amount of curve on the top and the bottom. And then from this edge here, I'm going to slide down again. And you can see a hairline, but once I add the bottom stroke, the hairline disappears. It's a strange letter. I can't say this is my favorite letter in Rotunda, Some of them, here's an example, are really angular. Look at that one. This is zigzag, and it's based on an initial curve, very different. This is the O curve here on the E, and this is a much straighter curve. But there are other examples where we have a rounder form, which I actually prefer. If I make this even narrower, I'm going to have to pull this in more. So you could do that. And it might very well dip a little bit below the descender line because it's a lot to fit in down there below the waistline. Okay, any other questions?
Tatiana says, are you able to share your file with the alphabet and
Sure,
literature?
yes, of course. Let me just come back and look at you. Would you like, what would I do? Would I send it to you, Dorothy?
You can put it in the chat, actually. Is that possible?
I'm not sure I would actually know how to do that.
Oh, okay. All right, you can send it to me. Send it to me. I will
Okay.
forward to
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll send the basic alphabet and the demo page and a
thanks.
couple of the historical models. Okay.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. That's very
Okay. Okay, so sorry if we ran over. That's not too
No
bad. We're just
worries.
3 minutes
No
over
worries.
time.
Yeah,
You all
no
have
worries.
time.
It was lovely. Very
Oh,
good.
thank
Anyone
you.
else has questions? Any other question? No, no questions.
Oh, I
Was
just
this one question here from
Sure.
Tux. As a champion of the parallel pen, I'm very, very happy to see parallel pens. Woo! Just in terms of how you came to that, because in the family of black letter alphabets, it seems that there are a lot of people that do textura and fracture, and a lot fewer do Bastarda and Schwabacher and Rotunda. Which one did you come to, or which one of them would you say is your favorite of the bunch? Because this seems like the odd one that doesn't quite match or still fit with the others.
A good question. When you talk about favorites, having been in calligraphy for many, many decades, I would say my favorites change. So
Mm.
you know the song, "When you're not near the one you love, when I'm not
If you
with the
can't
one
be
I
with the
love, I
one you
live
love,
with."
love the one you're with.
Yeah, exactly. I could sing that for you. But so sometimes I'll be doing a lot of work with one black letter hand or another. And
Mm,
that becomes, my passion. So actually, the last couple of weeks I've been working on a piece in a Gothicized italic, which is a modern Gothic hand, and I'm just adoring it. And it flows. It has a rhythm and a bounce. Rotunda is slower, but at the same time, I would say that having spent a couple of weeks, warming up for that workshop that I taught, I started to feel a lot of devotion to Rotunda. But if I have a text and I'm thinking how to express it, because that's one of the things we talk about in class sometimes, you have to find the alphabet that expresses the meaning or the feeling or the emotion of the text. I don't usually go to Rotunda. It's
mm,
I think it's kind of locked into a liturgical um, image um, and a time, that the Middle Ages. Uh,
mm.
so for me, it's not something that I use a lot.
Yeah.
Black Textura is also a lot of fun, but I have my own. I have a slightly looser version than the a 12th century Gothic.
Yeah.
So yeah, and again, I can't give you an absolute on that, except it sort of depends on what I'm working on,
Mm.
how I'm relating to these various scripts. Sometimes I adore copperplate. I'll be doing a lot of work with copperplate, and then I've had enough of that.
All right. Thank you, Eleanor.
So yeah. Tux has done a lot of work with Fraktur. And I think one of your pieces in the exhibit, right, is Fraktur?
Yeah, there's some
Yeah,
fracture in there.
I'll look for
So,
that. Okay.
all right. Thanks, Eleanor.
Uh, okay. Dorothy, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm going to stop the recording here. So, yes.